Psalm 100 from the Paleo-Hebrew Scriptures. Make a loud noise. Shout for joy unto Yahweh the ever-living. Go to him before his face with a ringing cry of joy. Know him intimately and completely, for he, Yahweh the ever-living, is El-Hayam. He has fashioned us, working by labor to produce us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the small cattle of his pasturing. Go to him, and to his gate with confession, thanksgiving, praise, into his enclosure with hymns of celebration. Cast forth praise unto him, kneel and place a gift before him. Prosper his name. For Yahweh is beautiful, kind, upright, fair and agreeable. His hasad, desire and mercy, zeal and kindness, endure unto time of long duration. For as far as the eye can see or perceive, to the edge of the horizon and beyond, and his faithfulness circles from age to age perpetually.
You've all heard of the Freemasons, but do you know about the Master Masons? Perhaps this is why you've arrived. But more importantly, is Christianity at odds with the ancient craft? A warning to Christians everywhere. My name is Noel Joshua Hadley, and I am happy to bring back, or pleased to bring back, Michael and Dan. And of course, Dan is Dan the man because he is a former Freemason, and he is here to tell us about what he knows, because he is in the know, on at least on certain things. And welcome, guys. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Awesome to be here.
Honored to be back, brother.
And I always, like, Dan, I probably shouldn't say this, but I always feel like I have such a bromance whenever you come on, and I just like staring at you. No, not really, but no, awesome. Tell us, why don't you? Dan, before we get into this, I think most of the people here, Michael, maybe you can give a little bit introduction to yourself too, but generally in the community, most people, Michael, know who you are. He's one of the elders here, actually. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. But thanks again for having me on. And I love your full head of hair and your beard as well. So we got a bit of a bromance going on.
I've last time I had you guys on was last summer, and I think I've gotten really gray since then. If I were to go back and look at footage, I think I had maybe some streaks of gray, but it's just gone
That's
white.
a beautiful thing. I think
that's wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. Scripture speaks highly.
That's how wise I've gotten in the last 9 months. I don't want to brag or anything, but
no, just saying, proof is in the pudding or in the hair. I love it so much. Well, thanks for having me on again. Man, I'm a nobody. The last 5 years or so, I've been operating as a pastor at a non-denominational mega church. I am the online pastor, so I'm kind of charting new territory. There's not very many churches, I think, in the country or world that are attempting to try to disciple people in a digital space. So I've been doing that. I love the work itself, but it's challenging at times. As you can imagine, my theology doesn't always line up with what we're teaching and preaching. So it can be difficult sometimes to disciple people and try to walk that line of, do you want me to teach the way the church would tell you, or do you want me to tell you what I think the truth is? So that's what I've been doing. And I've got wife, 2 kids, and I just love them to death. But I love talking about this stuff, and I love that you invited us on again. So thank you.
I was talking to you guys before we went live about how if my current ministry, which of course is the Unexpected Cosmology, if that goes if that goes down and I don't survive this, I want to be in the ministry for the rest of my life. And what you just said there, it's like if I ever were to get hired at any other church, they could somehow get past all the material I've pushed out here. That is a philosophical, or I guess a theological question I've asked myself. What would I be willing to teach, but also not teach, right? You know,
Mhm.
like things that I believe are true, and to completely remove that based on the audience. So that's a kind of interesting thought. All right, so let's talk about this. And if we do have time tonight, hopefully we're going to get around to serpent seed at the end of this conversation, which will be perfect because I just gave a talk a couple weeks ago on this. It was a 2-week talk, and it was amazing. I was telling Michael before the show that Michael and I have been talking about serpent seed for, I don't know how long it's been, Michael, 4 or 5 years, 5 years, whatever. But yet this was the first formal presentation that I've ever given on this. You guys beat me to it because you guys gave one recently, and we'll give your experiences on that. And I should have mentioned too, I didn't give your guys's boy band name, Bromalogy. And you guys, in Bromalogy, of course, you guys have a YouTube channel. Where else can they find you if they want to go look at your stuff?
I mean, technically, we have an Instagram, but to be honest, YouTube is where we're at right
Okay,
now.
all right.
Yeah,
Just
very
wanted to
first time. Yeah.
Spotify. Okay, well,
Yeah.
okay, Spotify. There you go. So, all right, take it away. So,
yeah,
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah. So, as Noel said, we are Michael and Dan from Bromalogy. Our tagline is the study of biblical food. So, Broma is food or meat in Greek. And so when Yeshua says, I have food that you don't know about, or going from milk to meat, that word is Broma. So we are the study of that. We try to dig deep and then share it. Many biblical topics. We're currently doing a commandment series, but we do a lot of fringe. We did serpent seed, as Noel said. We do many others, but we're here to talk about Freemasonry. It's been our most popular. We're definitely known for that. Dan was a former Freemason. We're going to get into it. We're going to specifically talk about today the Master Mason degree, and then also why a Christian shouldn't be there. But I don't know if it was live or not, or behind the stage, but we've been on before. I think it was last May. Same scenario. Basically, I'm kind of the part-time host here, and I'm kind of feeding Dan questions. Dan was a former Freemason. We talked about him joining, and then the first and second degree. But this one will be a little bit different. Like I said, third degree and Master Mason, and why a believer in Christ should not be part of it. Within Bromalogy podcast, we've had so many questions. This is definitely our highest rate of exchange between our viewers, but they're just not happy with us, Dan, right? They're just not happy that we're basically coming out and saying that a Christian should not be part of the craft. So Dan, just for the people who didn't see the first appearance on TUC, why did you join Freemasonry, and how high did you go?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, honestly, it's really hard to put into exact words why, but some of it is I was just simply drawn to the square and compasses. There was something about the symbol in Freemasonry. I was just drawn to it. And as I started to do some ancestry digging, this was kind of at the time when like ancestry.com became a thing and 23andMe. So I like jumped all over that. So they're probably cloning me all over the place right now. So God have mercy. But I started to uncover some stuff of history on my dad's side of the family, that my great grandfather was a 32nd degree Freemason. And I didn't know it at the time, but the lodge that I entered into actually merged with the same lodge that my great grandfather used to be part of. So there was definitely something spiritual that was happening as a result. And I knew I was a Christian at the time, and I was a conspiracy theorist at the time. It's not like I was ignorant about it. I just couldn't help myself. It was like, I don't know if you want to call it it's like the apple, it's like, come on, you take this knowledge. And I was like, I just can't help it. I got to do it. I got to see for myself. So that's kind of how I did it. And then I got to the 32nd degree. They call it the Royal, I think it's called like the Royal Secret, or Royal Prince of the Secret, or something like that. Honestly, the Scottish Rite part of it was kind of a little bit of a letdown. I thought it was a little lame. They kind of act out the rituals. If you're on the ancient free side, you sit in this big cathedral and you just like earn your degrees 5th through 32nd, just sitting in like this cathedral watching these plays. I came through the Prince Hall side of things, and that was a little bit more hands-on, blindfolded. But even that, they went through like all the degrees in one day, and I could just hear stuff going on. So it was kind of lame, to be honest. But technically 32nd degree is the highest I went.
Awesome,
I have to be honest. I don't want to insult your experiences, Dan, but I feel like Freemasonry is pretty gay to begin with, but that's just that's just me. I mean, seriously, but I'm curious, like how long you had mentioned last time you came on that to advance to the degrees, you have to be very dedicated to the craft. And of course you were you were memorizing, you would do your homework, and you would pass your tests. Well, I think you like oral exams or whatever they were. How long did it actually take you to ascend 32? I can't remember if you said last time.
Yeah, no, I don't think we talked about it. It was roughly 3 years, somewhere in there. To get the first 3 degrees, I kind of went through that pretty quickly. That was every bit, probably 9 months to 12 months. I escalated very, very quickly. Part of that, I'd love to say part of that was because I was proficient, but it's honestly because the craft is dying. The fraternity is dying. They're desperate for men to come in, because like a dying church where it's a bunch of old folks, that's what's going on in the lodge. It's a bunch of old men. If they don't get the youth in there, it's just going to die out, which I think is inevitable.
Yep. Anything else now before we get going?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. It seems like Freemasonry is so focused on ceremony itself that doesn't seem like a big attraction to young people. But that's probably a whole different discussion right there.
Yep. And Dan, before we get going on the Master Mason, we've talked about it on our podcast, but we have actually a whole testimony. But can you tell us a little bit about leaving the fraternity? And we're going to talk about why Christians shouldn't join and all that, but
yeah,
your personal experience.
Man, Mike, you remember, this is the only thing I've really hesitated to say in any kind of detail, and I won't again today. But I came across an experience where I was at a Freemasonic funeral, and there's a ton of people there, man. Like, people were flying in from all across the country. The guy that passed away, it was a big deal, not just in Masonry, but he was an officer and a retired vet as well. And man, as I was kind of in the middle of that, I was hearing stuff and seeing things, and call it discernment. But man, it was like a ton of bricks of grief started to just overcome me. I'm like, I am in deeper than I realized. I didn't realize what I was part of. And for the very first time, that was sort of God awakening me and saying, you're further in this than you realize. And I remember looking at my wife and saying, I got to get out of this. And so I called Michael shortly after that, and I'm like, bro, here's what my experience has been. And he's like, all right, let's come up with a plan to get you out. And so I kind of very slowly just started to back one foot out, just kind of not showing up to a meeting, and then not showing up to another one. And then by the time it was all said and done, I sent formal resignations into all of the various lodges, because I was part of the Scottish Rite, the Blue House, and the Red House, which is the York Rite side. And I said, hey, because of my beliefs in Jesus Christ, I've been asked to step down from this. Please demit me, take this as a formal demit process. I'm out of here. And then I moved to a different state. So, and even that was a little strange, because when I first moved to a different state, they followed me around for a little bit.
I remember that a few times. Yep. Okay, Dan, so Master Mason, this is the big one, right? This is the famous one. Let's get into it. What's your actual experience on the actual day you received your Master Mason degree? We've talked about that on a few episodes, but this is the big one. So
yeah, I think, when we think of Freemasonry, we think, as Noel said, it's either kind of gay or lame, or that maybe it's just all dark and all demonic. But to be honest with you, I was really excited for it. Like, I had when I got that first degree, there's some kind of spiritual flame that gets lit inside of you. I can't really put that in great words, but something changed after that first degree when you first initiated. And then by the time you go through the fellow craft, you get to the Master Mason degree. Mine was done in January, and there was this huge snowstorm that was planned. And so it almost got canceled. And you're not allowed to wear any Freemasonic regalia, rings or hats or shirts, until you become a Master Mason. So if you ever get caught wearing that stuff and you're just like an entered apprentice, not a good stuff. So I was excited, man. I had my ring ready. I remember I got my hair cut. I had a suit on. I had a blue button down, because it was like, it's the Blue Lodge, baby. I'm getting ready to become a Master Mason. So because of the proficiency that I'd showed, they didn't want to just have anybody do the ritual work. So typically what happens is the worshipful master and the different officers within the lodge are the ones that conduct the ritual work. But in this case, they wanted to bring in what was called a traveling degree team. So these are like bigwigs, like 32nd, 33rd degree Masons, past Grand Masters, current Grand Masters, or a current Grand Master. And they're the ones that conducted the ritual work. So, I mean, they come in this garb where it's like old English garb. I mean, they really went out of their way. And then an organ's playing in the middle of it. So
you got powdered wigs or no?
They did. I've got pictures. Yeah, I'll have to show them to you. Yeah, they're I mean, it's goofy looking. Look like you're LARPing, which is pretty much what you're doing. And so, anyways, I was pumped about it, man. It was a cold night, but I was really, really excited to go through this ritual work. So here I am in a room adjacent to the lodge. You got to divest yourself of any, like, I couldn't wear these chains or anything like that. You basically take all of your clothes off down to your boxers. And then for the Master Mason, you have no shirt on, you have your pants on, I think one pant leg rolled up, and then you've got a rope tied around your waist 3 times. And those were the moments where I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This doesn't seem good. You know, and I remember just praying, God, here I am. I'm here now. I need you to walk with me in this.
For the third time.
Yeah, for the third time, the third degree. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So Dan, you hear about the spooky stuff about Freemasonry. I've known you for 20 years. You're a great guy. But are we saying that every Mason is a bad person? Is that what we're trying to say? Are we going to lump them all together as bad people?
Yeah, no, I would say no. We're not judging individual hearts or motives. Masons are, most of them are sincere. They're charitable men. What we're addressing today, I think, is the system itself, the teachings, rituals, and symbols, and why those are incompatible with biblical Christianity. So what I mean by that is, before we do that, let me offer some clarification. What we're not going to do is we're not going to attack Freemasons personally. We respect many of the men that are involved. Some of them are still friends of mine, although we're not really still in touch a ton, but I would still consider them friends. However, our purpose here today is to examine the theological incompatibility between Christianity and Freemasonry. So if you were hoping that we were going to kind of get into the Illuminati conspiracy aspect of it, we might be a little bit let down. There's plenty of podcasts out there that would be more than happy to do that. And we might get into that side of things a little bit, but our focus primarily here today is on the spiritual claims and practices of Freemasonry itself. And
now,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, now I will hold to my opinion is my own of the super gay statement. But yeah, I'd like to just, agree with what you're saying. And I've stated this before, that when I talk to different, theorists out there, on the greater conspiracies, they have this idea. I get this sense from people sometimes, and I kind of have to stop them and go like, wait a second. Like, there's this idea that a Freemason, like you enter the craft and they all know who killed JFK and the shape of the earth, and they know about stolen history and all these different elements and things we talk about. And it's like, really? Like, you think that they just tell you all this stuff when you go in it? And in reality, my experience, the Freemasons I've spoken to, or the stories I've heard coming out of it, is that most of these are like low-level entry guys that their wives are like, helping fundraisers for spaghetti dinners and local events like that. And it's kind of a boys club, and there's, whatever. So it seems like the sheer amount, or I should say the few people that really go down to, the depth of perhaps darkness, I would say it's far and few between. Would you agree with that generally?
Oh, let me go. 100%. I agree with that. That's part of the problem, I think. In fact, I was disappointed because I wanted to know those things. I wanted to know, did we land on the moon or not? I was kind of hoping I would get that information. And what I found is like, it's like Boy Scouts for men. It's like, what are we doing? No one even here knows what we're doing. We're just going through these rituals, and it's like, I guess. So yeah, there's very few people, I think, reach a point where they really, really realize that the darkness is that dark. And for me, I think the Lord brought me all the way to the edge of that, where my next step was going to enter into that sincere darkness. And he pulled me out right before that. And if you think about it, from like anything that's under 32 degrees or colder is in a frozen state, right? It's not till you hit 33 degrees that you become liquefied. And that's what's symbolic of the degrees, is once you hit that 33rd and moving forward, you're in a state of spiritual liquidness. And man, I think that's where the real darkness is.
And I think that, am I correct that you have to be invited to be a 33, right? Like you can't just pass a test or do something. Like you literally have to be invited by another 33. Am I correct?
That's exactly right. And this is some speculation on my part, but what I think happens is you're either down to move into darkness and they know that about you, or they blackmail you. And so you have no choice but to go with the program once you get invited. And when I became a 32nd degree, my second night ever as a 32nd degree Mason, they put me, they were like, all right, we're changing all the officers. Dan, you come sit here. And they had me sitting in the treasury desk. I never said I wanted to be a treasury. I never said that I could, or I had no accounting background. There was no reason to put me there, but they sent me home with this briefcase like this thick. And they were like, hey, you need to look back, go the last 5-10 years back. If there's anything funny in there, just let us know. I'm like, what? And I remember walking home with this briefcase and my wife is like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. They made me the treasury for this. I'm not sure what's happening. And then post this funeral, I got a call from one of the guys that was high up and was like, hey, I need you to write a check to this family. And man, I don't know what it was about it, but I'm like, that's it right there. If I put my name on this, I don't know if it was spiritual or physical. I don't know. I just knew in deep down in my soul, do not put your name on that check. Do not write a check to that family. So my belief is that they were going to try to blackmail me. I don't know exactly how that would have worked, but that was the sense that I got.
Yeah. Go ahead, Noel.
Yeah, I would think that most kind of deeper, darker organizations like that, if it's not Freemasonry, if it's something else, it's going to be the same thing. Even if you're like going into Hollywood, I've heard those stories of individuals who have, some people claim to have been in Hollywood their whole lives, never encountered anything. And then I've interviewed other people. They're like, no, they reached that point where there was like a point of no return of that blackmail moment. They're going to have you do something, show you something. You're a part of it now. There's no going back. But I did want to, before you go into your whole thing, Dan, because I know you have a lot you want to talk about. And I want to say this before I forget. And you would talk about how it's kind of like an old man's club now, bunch of old dudes kind of standing around trying to get the young people in to kind of graduate them quickly because it's dying. And I've stated this before, and it's when I look at history, when I look at the last several hundred years, it seems like when you look back at the 1700s, Freemasonry seemed to be a force to be reckoned with. Like it seemed to be a really big deal, full of all these different symbols and meaning. And you're not the first person I've spoken with that has come out of Freemasonry and has stated that it seems like it's these ceremonies that have lost their meaning. Like there's all these symbols and deeper esoteric stuff that if you actually, they would talk to other Freemasons and they wouldn't even know what it meant. Like it would just completely lost to them. And to me, that seems like it's Freemasonry's lost its potency, that it's not to undermine it in any way, but it doesn't seem to be the organization that it was, 200 years ago. Even if you, it's funny, you drive all over America and there's like some shed there that, has a Freemason logo on it. They're everywhere all across America, but they're kind of empty. You look at the parking lot, there's like 1 or 2 cars parked there once in a while. Anyways.
Yeah. I mean, even within our comments, we've noticed differences of United Kingdom lodges that do some things differently. Right, Dan?
Yeah, we're definitely noticing that. A lot of brothers from and I say brothers, let me clarify that. It's just a habit. I've had somebody say, he's still a Mason. He calls them brothers. Relax. It's just a habit. But yeah, they're saying, hey, the ritual that you're saying doesn't match ours at all. And when I noticed, I was part of 2 different lodges. I was part of Ancient Free and Accepted Lodge and the Prince Hall Lodge Free and Accepted Masons. And theirs looked a little bit different. So I do think it's lost its potency. I don't think most people have any idea what's going on in there anymore. Yeah.
So Dan, any more on, the purpose of this episode, that we're not attacking any system of morality or parallel scriptures you would want to?
Yeah, no, I think that's it, man. I'm not trying to attack the individuals. You guys do your thing. Our assertion is that Christians specifically should not become Masons. And I take even more issue with somebody who's a pastor and still a Freemason. That's more common than you might think. And they're proud about that. I'm a Mason and I'm a pastor. That's like their excuse. I'm a Mason, but I'm also a pastor. So what? What does that mean? You could be a pedophile and be a pastor. That doesn't mean anything. So that's what I'm trying to drive at, is I'm trying to show the audience that this is not compatible with Christianity, as much as a Freemason might tell you that it is.
Dan, have you found when you're hearing from pastors and they're like, I'm a Freemason and that's how cool, and I'm a pastor too. Have you, I don't know if like you've done a census in your head of noticing trends with certain denominations? Are there certain types of churches that are more likely to have Freemasons in their ranks or from top management?
Absolutely. It's definitely on the Protestant side of things. More often than not, the African-American churches, but I'm careful to say that as if it's impossible for a Southern Baptist church. If you are Catholic or you're Orthodox, that you're forbidden to become a Freemason. So it's like, they actually have it right. The Protestants are like, yeah, it's no big deal. And that was part of the problem when I joined, is the church I went to was a Presbyterian church. And when I told these brothers and sisters there that I was going to join Freemasonry, none of them were like, well, I don't know, man. I'm not so sure that's a good idea. They're all like, oh, great. My uncle was a Freemason. My grandfather was. If anything, they were encouraging. And I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying you can see the culture within these, Protestant churches that, if anything, they're supporting it.
I never really thought about Orthodoxy before, and looking into who their allegiance might be with. Here in Europe, we don't need to talk about my experiences in Europe, but I will say this for the sake of the conversation, that, I'm going into all these cathedrals. I've gone into dozens and dozens of cathedrals. Now here in England, it's the Church of England, so it's on the Protestant side. But when I was going through Spain and Portugal, and I'll be going through there again, I'm going through the Catholic ones, and you can't enter a cathedral with it. You just look for it. It's like the Where's Waldo, and there's a Jesuit sign somewhere. They're going to put their calling card like, hey, we're watching you. We're here, telling all the pastors, the priests, everything, we're here, our presence. So I would think that, on the Catholic side, they have the Jesuits to deal with, which is another whole conversation right there. All right. So Michael, turning back to you, Michael, what's your next?
Worries. Yeah, no worries. Dan, so, if you listen to our episodes or just do any kind of different research, they use the Bible a lot, right? They use the Bible. We've talked about the passwords and all that. You're going to get more into it. But why does it matter if Freemasonry uses Bible stories or names? Like, why does that even matter?
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second, Michael. I just want to set up a couple key points that I think will help us to keep in context with this conversation. One, let me just say this: Freemasons or Freemasonry claims to be a beautiful system of morality veiled in allegory, illustrated by symbols. So for the Christians, all morality must be derived from God's revelation through Holy Scriptures. That's 2 Timothy, where it says all Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. So Freemasonry substitutes a system of morality, which is accessible to people of any faith, thereby diluting the exclusive allegiance to God of the Bible. We serve a jealous God, so that is an issue in and of itself. So during the initiation, the candidate can take an oath on any sacred text. So in most lodges, it's going to be a King James Version Bible that's sitting on the altar. But if somebody comes in and they're Muslim, they want to take their obligation on the Quran, absolutely. So it all depends on their religion. So this violates God's clear prohibition against mixing worship with other gods. You can look to the second commandment in Exodus 20. Deuteronomy 6, I think, is even a little bit more harsh. It says, you shall not have any other gods of the gods of the people who are around you. For the Lord your God is in the midst of you is a jealous God, lest you anger the Lord your God, and his anger would be kindled against you, and he destroys you from off the face of the earth. It's a pretty big deal, So I think in and of itself, when you're teaching morality, the only safe place for the Christian to learn morality is through Holy Scriptures. So
I was going to ask you if Masonry doesn't allow for Orthodoxy or Catholics, why are they allowing Islam to come in?
Well, it's actually the other way around. Masons would be perfectly happy with a Catholic or somebody from the Orthodox religion to join. It's the other way around. The Catholics and the Orthodox will not allow you to be a member of their church and become a Freemason. So Freemasons are fine with Orthodox or Catholics coming through, but their respective churches wouldn't agree with that. Another thing I would say here too is if we look at, there's a Genesis 3 parallel here, and this will kind of tie into, I think, the serpent seed theory we'll talk about later. But in Eden, the serpent offered an alternative system of wisdom and morality. You will be like gods, knowing both good and evil. That's Genesis 3. Freemasonry positions itself as a parallel source of the same type of moral enlightenment. And I think it goes back to that. The fraternity itself only goes back to the 17th century. But I think this wisdom that we're talking about, this craft wisdom, goes all the way back to the garden. I think it's ancient. Michael, I'm sorry, brother. You had asked, why does it even matter if somebody doesn't take it seriously? It's just allegorical. It's just symbols or whatever. What difference does it make? That's what you asked, right, Ben?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just why does it matter that they're basically using a Christian's Bible, right?
Sure.
Why does it even matter? So.
Yeah. Well, I believe it matters because they're taking it out of the biblical context and they're reinterpreting it as secret symbols. So, for example, Tubal-Cain becomes the password that supposedly grants this hidden knowledge. But this is a distortion of the scripture and creates confusion about God's truth. So as we kind of look at some of the passwords, I know we had talked about this a little bit on the first time we were on the show, but let me kind of reiterate just to kind of bring people up to speed, or if you didn't get a chance to listen to it. Michael and I have been asserting that the passwords are connected to a Canaanite bloodline this whole time. So let me just kind of walk you through this and kind of show you what we found. So in the first degree, the entered apprentice degree, the password is Boaz. And Boaz is a righteous man. He's the husband of Ruth. You can check Ruth. I think it's chapter 4. Ruth was a Moabite from a people that God warned Israel about in Deuteronomy 23. It says this: no Amorite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the truth of the generation, even to the 10th generation. None belonging to them shall enter into the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the way when you came out forth from Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pether. And I'm going to keep jacking up the rest of these names, so I'll spare you guys of that. But the point is, the lodge uses Boaz symbolically, not in a like redeeming context, but in a hidden wisdom sense, which divorces it from its biblical meaning. And that's partly why there's an issue with that. Then you get to the fellowcraft degree, and that password, if you will, is Shibboleth. And we look to Judges chapter 12. This is in verses 5 and 6. It used a military test to identify the Ephraimites for slaughter. And so what they would do is they would ask the Ephraimites to say the word Shibboleth. And if they couldn't say it, they'd kill them right there on the banks of the Jordan. And 42,000 were slaughtered as a result of this. So this is connecting tribal conflict, judgment, and execution. So again, here we have a password is being used as a token of distinction for separation rather than Christian unity. And then when we get to the third degree, so we had a lot of people reaching out. Masons were like, oh, this is a stretch. I know you guys are just pulling at straws. Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. But when you get to the third degree, this Canaanite bloodline connection, I don't know, you be the judge for yourself. The Master Mason password is Tubal-Cain. And if you get to Genesis 4, verse 22, Tubal-Cain is an instructor of every artifice and brass and iron. He was the first one to fashion metals. He's also the first one to fashion metals into weapons to kill people with. Tubal-Cain is the 5th generation from Cain who murdered his brother. So he's the 5th great-grandson of Cain. So what he's symbolizing in Freemasonry is technological pride, but it's also aligning with Cain's cursed blood lineage. So the fact that this is the highest degree password is Tubal-Cain directly connects Masonic identity to the line of Cain, which is literally the archetype of the rebellion against God. So that's a big problem.
Yeah, Dan, you just said it's the highest degree, but you were 32nd. Yeah. I've heard up to 100. What does that mean? Like, how can you say that that's the highest degree, yet we hear about these other degrees?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Masons say that of themselves. They say the 3rd degree is the highest. And the reason for it is they're saying the first 3 degrees is basically where the meat of Freemasonry is. And then those other degrees are kind of adding detail to that. So this, I hate that I'm using this analogy, but trend with me. It's like the canon is the meat. And when we read extra biblical text, it's kind of adding some details. So even if a book like Jasher, we're like, I don't know that I would call that authoritative, but it helps us with some additional detail for what we would consider authoritative. It's kind of like that. So yeah, 3rd degree is the highest degree.
Yep. So we hear about all these rituals, Dan. We talked about it. You've talked about your chest being bare, knife pointed at you, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's symbolic, right? That's what they'll say. That's how they defend it.
Mm-hmm.
What's the literal interpretation? There's literal metaphors. They would say there's no harm to it. You know, Bromalogy is big on literal versus metaphor, right? Metaphors point to the literal. Why is this a bad thing? What's the harm with these ritualistic symbology?
Yeah, like we get that. I hear that all the time where people are like, I mean, I just don't take it that seriously. Like, you should. If you're publicly participating in rituals that declare salvation apart from Christ, you're bearing false witness. It's that simple. Even if you don't mean it that way, it creates a stumbling block. The call of Christ is to come out and be separated in 2 Corinthians. So
how does it? Well, I was going to say really quickly that it's hard to argue against Tubal Cain. Like that's just bizarre. If anyone is going to claim that there's, that this is, not some sort of Cain, centric system that, named the highest Tubal Cain. But I wanted to ask how would a Freemason advertise salvation apart from Christ?
Yeah, we'll kind of get into that a little bit more, and I'll talk a little bit more detail, but the answer is in the legend of Hiram Abiff. And you're taught that in the 3rd degree ritual, where you are representing Hiram Abiff. You're murdered in this ritual, you're buried, and then you're resurrected. And so that's how they would basically exchange the risen Christ and teach it this way. The other thing with Tubal Cain, I know we said we weren't going to get into like the conspiracy side of things, but just for what it's worth, if you look at the Facebook logo, it's 2 balls and a cane. If you look to Lion King and Rafiki, and remember that monkey that walk around, or I don't think he's a monkey. He's like what is it?
Baboon.
Baboon. Thank you. He's walking around with 2 balls and a cane. I think you're right. I think it is a baboon it has like the natural makeup.
Yeah, I was going to say, was it a mandrill or whatever? But yeah, baboon.
Yeah,
okay,
we'll
go with baboon.
But he's got 2 balls and a cane. That's what it represents. Disney is telling you right there, 2-ball cane. And so if you ever see that symbol like on somebody's car, it's kind of like almost looks like a 7, and it's got those 2 little balls next to it. That's what it's saying, 2-ball cane. It's saying that you identify with Cain. I don't know how you wiggle out of that. No, I think you're right. How do you get out of that? We
had a commenter try to do that. They try to wiggle out. Mm-hmm. We've been saying that it's linking to Cain, and he asked what password links directly to Cain. Was like the 3rd one.
The 3rd one.
And then of course he goes all metaphor and says, "Well, what does it stand for?" Like,
So it's a different question, Yeah, exactly.
The definition of it.
Yeah, exactly.
When you ask for a direct password, it's weird.
Yeah.
Somebody put 007 here, which is kind of interesting because
never noticed that before.
Yeah, I'm actually writing a paper on 007 this week. So that's kind of interesting to think about.
That's cool. I've never thought about that. Good one. Yeah. That's a good contribution. This is probably important to note this here now that we're saying it, because I'm here. I'm a ex-Freemason that took an obligation to not tell the secrets, and here I am telling the secrets. Right? We heard this a ton, and when we posted this. So here's what I would say to this: Freemasonry's claiming that they have this like secret knowledge, or they're claiming ownership over these passwords. Let me just say this: every single password is plainly listed as public domain in any King James Bible. And King James is free of copyright. So nobody's got copyright over the King James Bible. Also, the King James Bible predates Freemasonry by over 3,000 years. So there's no spiritual authority or exclusive claim can ever be made over these passwords or rituals or whatever, because every single one of them belongs in the King James Bible. The Freemasons are the ones that stole it from Scripture and then perverted it to mean something different. I think that's an important thing, because I know there's people that are squirming that are either current Masons or past ones that can't stand that I'm saying the passwords right now.
Yep. 300 years, I believe. So Dan, if anybody can join, I know there's certain types of lodges that you can choose the book, which one you want to go to, Shriners and all that. Are you saying Masons can worship other gods and kind of join this lodge kind of thing?
Yeah, so Freemasonry doesn't explicitly tell members to worship pagan gods. However, it does require a belief in what they call a supreme being, which can be from any religion. And it mixes symbols and rituals from multiple different traditions. So this is, in my opinion, a spiritual compromise. God is a jealous God, as we talked about before, who demands exclusive worship. So although they don't force you. And that's a big one too, Michael. We got a lot of that in the comments. People are like, you don't have to believe in any God or any particular God. We're open. That's the problem. If you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, go for it. I mean, mix yourself with all kinds of other gods, I suppose. But if you're a Christian, this is not the Christian way. Jesus and Yahweh are not pleased by that. So let's get into a little bit about the widow's son and the celestial lodge, because I think this will help answer Noel's earlier question as well. So in the third degree, candidates reenact the death and the raising of Hiram Abiff, which Hiram Abiff is the widow's son. So when we talk about the widow's son, that's what they're referring to. They're referring to Hiram Abiff. The theological problem with this is the ceremony implies that the lodge, not God, raises the initiate to immortality. So in John 11, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. In Acts 4, it says salvation is in no one else. But the celestial lodge, the Masonic catechism speaks of ascending to the celestial lodge above. So what is it? It's symbolic of the afterlife where good Masons gather. So there's no biblical basis. Heaven is entered by, in the biblical basis, heaven is entered by grace through faith in Jesus Christ alone. That's Ephesians 2. But Freemasonry is replacing itself with that truth, that divine resurrection into eternity through itself. So when you're going through the ritual, like I told you before, you symbolically get murdered as Hiram Abiff. You're symbolically laying there. Some lodges you actually get placed into a coffin. I got placed into like nylon sheet kind of thing, and was carried around the lodge, but you're supposed to just like lay there quiet while you're listening to everything, right? And they're hearing all this stuff going. And then eventually you're raised by what's called the Master Mason. I think it's called the lion's paw, where they grab you like this, right? And they're going to pull you up and raise you up to meet face to face with a Masonic brother who's raising you into the celestial lodge. That's a different place, guys. That's not what we're promised in Scripture. So like we saw in the first degree, when you knock, it says knock and it will be open unto you. And when you're knocking, literally as an initiate, they open the door. A Masonic person is opening the door unto you. So they're like swapping places with Christ. Same thing in the third degree. It's the Master Mason or another Mason who's raising you up into immortality to be brought into the celestial lodge. It's a big problem. That is a big problem. So,
okay.
No, it's okay. That was it.
So Dan, and it kind of goes with this, and we get a lot of stuff on this. Isn't this just your interpretation, Dan? We get a lot of stuff where they're just attacking you and they're throwing their stuff, their mud against the wall, and kind of say, "This is not how I interpret it." So isn't this your interpretation?
Yeah,
I think you have a foundation of the Bible and a good biblical knowledge, but isn't just your interpretation of the Freemason rituals?
It is. And to Noel's earlier point, it's because it's a skeleton of what it used to be. Nobody actually knows what's happening in there. So you're left to your own interpretation. There is they can't even agree amongst themselves. As we said earlier, ones in England are like, not true. Prince Hall's like, that's not what it means. Ancient, free, and accepted. That's not what they're not organized, guys, at all. They're not organized. So yes, it is my own interpretation, but look, every believer has to test claims against Scripture. That's Acts 17. So I'd encourage anybody listening to compare the rituals and the teachings of Freemasonry with the plain teachings of the Bible. You don't have to take my word for it. Just study it and search it out for yourself. But here's what I would say. If you are somebody that's in Freemasonry now, particularly if you're a pastor, if you're a professing Christian, same. But really, if you're a pastor, even more, I want you to consider these four things. Straight up, Freemasonry and Christianity are fundamentally incompatible. Number one, Freemasonry offers an alternative moral system. That's wrong. There is only one moral system that matters to us as Christians. Two, it unites symbols of rebellion against God. Why are we using words like Tubal Cain and aligning ourselves with that? Three, it blurs the exclusive claims of Christ as Savior. That is the only way you can be raised in immortality. There is no such thing as a Mason raising you into the celestial lodge. And four, it invites participation in rituals that ascribe to man what belongs to God alone. So there's scriptural warnings for this. If you want to go and search this out, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, do not be unequally yoked. You got Exodus 34, you shall not worship any other gods, jealous God. You got Galatians chapter 1, if anybody preaches a different gospel, let him be accursed. And I would argue this is a different gospel, brothers.
Yep. So this is, we have like a little presentation we're doing here. This is kind of the last question. We have many questions coming from the chat and the Discord as well. But Dan, for this last question, for this Master Mason presentation, you kind of say why a Christian shouldn't join. What if they're considering joining? Kind of a little bit of a slant of what you just said. What if they're just thinking like, maybe I don't trust him, and these are his interpretations, but I'll still take the lead, kind of like you did. So.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine say that. He's like, I listened to your podcast. Here's my response. So what? Okay, so what? I would say, just please pray carefully, study scriptures, and ask yourself if you can, in good conscience, participate in oaths, rituals, and symbols that contradict the gospel. Jesus is enough. He doesn't require secret knowledge or any kind of man-made rites to give you life and purpose. So I would say just pray carefully about that with those things in mind.
Yeah. So, no, do you have any questions? I have like 10,
Well,
2 that are directed towards you, but do you have any before we get going onto those?
Well, I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about for the last several minutes, Dan, is when you talked about some of the Freemasons will, they'll be following your presentations and they'll argue back and they'll say, well, that's just your interpretation, man. And I am actually curious about, if they do, this isn't necessarily, well, maybe this is my question. Because I've been thinking about this and how when I'm looking at very esoteric stuff, we might even get into it tonight later on in the conversation, depending on how it goes. I have changed my opinion on the meaning of certain things. The more I research stuff and I see more connections and so on and so forth. Going back to the Tubal Cain thing, when they, for me, that's just like, it's hard to argue against that. It's hard to have any kind of redemption in that. Have they given their, say, okay, here, you're wrong, Dan, and here's why you're wrong. Have they given their perspective on Tubal Cain or it could be anything else, really?
Yeah, they don't really. It's usually when they're just combating with us, it's just saying we're dumb and we don't know what we're talking about, and this podcast is crap. That's usually something like that. And you're like, thank you. It's very helpful. Thank you. But I've kind of done my own, like, let me check myself. Like, how can we make sense of Tubal Cain? And what it boils back down to is alchemy. It's this idea that both the literal and the metaphor, the literal would be, in this case, heating up metals that you can shape. And in this case, for Tubal Cain's case, he shaped them into murder weapons. But spiritually speaking, or symbolically speaking, it's our souls. And as we heat up our souls, we can use alchemy to enlighten ourselves. And so the idea or the assertion is that everybody's born with this, born with God inside of them. And they're trying to just find this God or bring this God out. So you're looking within for enlightenment. So that would, it's very new agey. That would be probably the best explanation that would make sense with Freemasonry.